My son texted me, "You weren't invited to dinner, my wife doesn't want you there." But my name is Janie, and I am 58 years old, a retired high school teacher living alone since my husband passed away 5 years ago. My only son, Andrew, recently married a woman named Melissa. Yesterday, I received a text message that shattered my heart. Andrew wrote that I wasn't invited to their housewarming dinner because his wife didn't want me there. The pain cut deeper because I had just finished paying for their new home. Something inside me broke at that moment. If you are watching this video, I would love to know how you would react in my situation. Please, like and subscribe to find out how my story unfolded and the surprising decision I made that changed everything. I need to take you back to understand how we got here. Life was different when Thomas, my husband, was alive. We created a warm, loving home for our son Andrew. He was our miracle baby, born after 3 devastating miscarriages. The doctors had told us to give up, but somehow Andrew came into our world perfect and healthy. We cherished every moment with him. Thomas and I built our lives around Andrew. My husband worked as an engineer, often taking on overtime to ensure we could provide the best for our son. I taught English at the local high school, arranging my schedule so I could be home when Andrew returned from school. We were not wealthy, but we managed our finances carefully, saving for Andrew's college fund from the day he was born. Our home was modest, but filled with laughter. Family dinner was sacred. No matter how busy our days were, we gathered around the table each evening sharing stories and dreams. Thomas had a rule: no phones at dinner. He believed face-to-face conversation built stronger bonds than any modern technology. Andrew was a bright child with a kind heart. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science, just like his father. I still remember the science fair projects we would work on together, spending weekends gathering materials and conducting experiments. Thomas would help with the technical aspects while I assisted with the presentation. Andrew won first place 3 years in a row. During summer breaks, Thomas would take 2 weeks off from work and we would go camping in the national parks. Andrew learned to fish from his father, to identify constellations, and to respect nature. Those nights around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, remain some of my most treasured memories. As Andrew entered his teenage years, he maintained his close relationship with us, unlike many of his peers who distanced themselves from their parents. He confided in us about school crushes, shared his worries about college applications, and sought our advice on important decisions. Thomas was his role model, and I was his confidant. When Andrew was accepted to Stanford University with a partial scholarship, we couldn't have been prouder. Although the scholarship helped, we still needed to contribute significantly to his education. Thomas and I had prepared for this moment, having saved diligently for years. We wanted Andrew to focus on his studies without the burden of student loans hanging over him. During his college years, Andrew would call me every Sunday evening without fail. He would share details about his classes, his roommates, and campus life. He came home for every holiday, often bringing laundry and requesting his favorite homemade meals. Thomas and I would count the days until these visits. The summer before Andrew's senior year, Thomas began experiencing chest pain. At first, he dismissed it as indigestion or stress. I insisted he see a doctor, but appointments were scheduled weeks out. One morning, I woke to find Thomas gasping for breath beside me. I called an ambulance, but by the time we reached the hospital, his heart had stopped. Despite the doctor's efforts, my beloved husband was gone. Just like that. No goodbyes, no final words of love, just silence where his heartbeat should have been. Andrew rushed home from a summer internship. Together, we planned the funeral, received condolences, and tried to make sense of a world without Thomas. I still remember how Andrew stood tall at the service, delivering a eulogy that brought everyone to tears, speaking of his father's integrity, wisdom, and unconditional love. The months that followed were a blur of paperwork, insurance claims, and learning to navigate life alone. Thomas had been meticulous about financial planning. He left us with a substantial life insurance policy, our mortgage paid off, and investments that provided me with financial security, though I would have traded all of it to have him back for just one more day. Andrew insisted on finishing his final year at Stanford, though I could tell he worried about leaving me alone. I encouraged him to go, knowing Thomas would have wanted him to complete his education. We spoke even more frequently that year, sometimes twice a day. When he graduated with honors in computer science, I sat in the audience alone, crying tears of both pride and sorrow, knowing Thomas should have been beside me. After graduation, Andrew accepted a position with a tech company in our city, turning down more lucrative offers in Silicon Valley. When I asked why, he said simply, "I want to be close to you, Mom." He found an apartment 20 minutes from my house and would come over for dinner at least twice a week. On weekends, he would help with house repairs and yard work tasks Thomas used to handle. Though the void left by Thomas could never be filled, Andrew and I formed a new kind of bond, supporting each other through our grief. We established new traditions while honoring old ones. Every year on Thomas's birthday, we would visit his favorite hiking trail and share memories of him. I gradually adapted to my new reality. I continued teaching for 2 more years before deciding to retire early. The insurance money and Thomas's investments meant I could live comfortably without working. I joined a widow support group, took up gardening, and volunteered at the local library. Life was different, but I was finding my way. Through it all, Andrew remained my rock, my connection to Thomas, and my greatest joy. I never imagined anything could come between us. I never thought I would have to choose between my love for him and my self-respect. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Everything changed when Melissa entered the picture. Andrew mentioned her casually at first. "I met someone at work, Mom. Her name is Melissa. She's in corporate finance." It was about 2 years after Thomas passed away. I was delighted that Andrew was dating again. His grief over losing his father had kept him from pursuing relationships for a long time. When he asked if he could bring her to Sunday dinner, I spent the entire day cleaning the house and preparing Andrew's favorite lasagna. I wanted to make a good impression on this woman who had captured my son's attention. Melissa arrived wearing an elegant black dress and designer heels that seemed excessive for a casual family dinner. She was undeniably beautiful with her sleek blonde hair, perfect makeup, and manicured nails. I greeted her with a warm hug, which she returned stiffly, barely patting my back before quickly pulling away. "Your home is very cozy," she commented, her eyes scanning my living room with its comfortable but worn furniture. I had detected a hint of judgment in her tone, but brushed it aside, attributing it to first meeting nerves. Over dinner, Melissa spoke at length about her job at a prestigious financial firm, her recent promotion, and her plans to climb the corporate ladder. She mentioned her MBA from Wharton several times and the luxury condo she had recently purchased downtown. "And what do you do, Janie?" she asked, using my first name despite Andrew having introduced me as my mom. "I was an English teacher for 30 years, I replied. "I retired a few years ago after my husband passed." "Oh, how quaint," she said with a tight smile. "Teaching must have been fulfilling." Throughout the evening, I noticed how Andrew deferred to Melissa, checking her expression before speaking, laughing a bit too enthusiastically at her jokes and repeatedly mentioning her accomplishments. It was subtle, but as a mother who had known her son his entire life, I could see he was trying very hard to impress her. As weeks passed, Andrew brought Melissa around more frequently. I made genuine efforts to connect with her, asking about her family, her interests, and her work. Her answers were always polite but brief, closing doors to further conversation rather than opening them. "Would you like to go shopping with me this weekend?" I offered one evening. "There's a new boutique downtown I've been wanting to check out." "Oh, that's sweet," Melissa replied with a practiced smile. "But I have plans with my friends from business school. Maybe another time." That another time never seemed to materialize. Each invitation I extended was met with a similar response, always delivered with that same artificial smile that never reached her eyes. Meanwhile, I began noticing subtle changes in Andrew. He started canceling our regular dinners often with last-minute texts. "Sorry, Mom, working late tonight." Or, "Melissa got tickets to a show, rain check." Our twice-weekly meals dwindled to once a month, and even then, Melissa was always included. When I called him, he would often whisper into the phone as if not wanting Melissa to hear him talking to me. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. Gone were the deep discussions and easy laughter we once shared. The annual hike on Thomas's birthday approached a tradition Andrew and I had maintained since his passing. The day before, Andrew called to cancel. "Melissa planned a surprise weekend getaway," he explained, sounding genuinely torn. "I didn't know the date when she booked it. But this is your father's birthday," I reminded him gently. "We always go to Pine Ridge Trail." "I know, Mom. I'm really sorry. We can go next weekend, can't we?" I went alone that year, carrying 2 memorial stones up the trail instead of one. Standing at Thomas's favorite viewpoint, I couldn't help feeling that I was losing Andrew too, though in a different way. Thanksgiving had always been a big event in our household. I invited Melissa's parents to join us, hoping to merge our families. They declined, explaining they had already booked a cruise. Melissa suggested we have dinner at an upscale restaurant instead of my home. It would be easier for everyone, she insisted. No cooking, no cleanup. But we always cook together for Thanksgiving, I protested. It's our tradition. Traditions can change, she replied with a dismissive wave. At the restaurant, Melissa dominated the conversation, barely allowing Andrew and me to speak. When I mentioned a funny story from Andrew's childhood, she smoothly interrupted, steering the conversation back to her recent promotion. I noticed Andrew's eyes darting between us, his discomfort evident. Christmas was no better. We had always decorated the tree together, but that year, Andrew informed me they would be spending Christmas Eve with Melissa's family and would only come by for a brief visit on Christmas Day. They stayed for exactly 2 hours, Melissa checking her watch continuously, before announcing they needed to leave for another engagement. One afternoon, Melissa unexpectedly came to my house alone. Andrew had mentioned they were looking for investment opportunities, and she wanted my advice given how well Thomas had managed our finances. I was surprised but pleased by her interest. While I was making tea, Melissa wandered into my home office where I had been reviewing some financial documents. When I entered with the tea tray, I caught her quickly stepping away from my desk, a strange expression flitting across her face. "I hope you don't mind," she said smoothly. "I noticed the papers and was curious. Thomas left you quite comfortable, didn't he?" Something about her tone made me uneasy. "Yes, he was always very careful with our planning," I replied carefully. For the first time, Melissa engaged me in extended conversation, asking detailed questions about our investments, insurance policies, and savings. Her eyes held a calculating gleam I hadn't noticed before. As she left, she hugged me for the first time since we'd met, her demeanor warmer than it had ever been. That night, I received an unusually enthusiastic call from Andrew inviting me to dinner that weekend. When I arrived at the restaurant, Melissa was uncharacteristically attentive, complimenting my outfit and asking about my day. Throughout the meal, she and Andrew exchanged meaningful glances, clearly building up to something. "Mom," Andrew finally said, reaching for Melissa's hand, "we have some news." My heart skipped a beat. Were they expecting a baby? Was I going to be a grandmother? "We're engaged," they announced in unison, Melissa thrusting her left hand forward to display a diamond ring that must have cost at least 3 months of Andrew's salary. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Joy, for my son of course, but also a nagging concern that I couldn't quite name. Still, I pushed those feelings aside and embraced them both, determined to support Andrew's choice. "I'm so happy for you," I said, and I meant it, even as a small voice inside me whispered that something wasn't quite right. Little did I know then just how much this relationship would test the bonds between my son and me, or that it would ultimately force me to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life. The months following the engagement announcement brought a whirlwind of wedding planning, with Melissa taking center stage in every decision. I had always imagined being involved in my only son's wedding preparations, helping choose venues, tasting cakes, and offering guidance. Instead, I found myself relegated to the sidelines, my input neither sought nor welcomed. Melissa and her mother, Patricia, a woman with the same calculating eyes as her daughter, had already selected a luxury hotel ballroom before Andrew even had the chance to discuss venues with me. When I gently suggested looking at the church where Thomas and I had married, where Andrew had been baptized, Melissa dismissed the idea immediately. "We're going for a modern aesthetic, Janie," she explained condescendingly. "That old church would clash with our vision." The date they chose for the wedding struck me like a physical blow. June 17th, my wedding anniversary with Thomas. When I mentioned this to Andrew privately, his face fell. "Oh, Mom, I didn't realize," he said, looking genuinely distressed. "I can talk to Melissa about changing it." But the next day, he called to say the date couldn't be changed. "The venue is booked solid for the next year, and Melissa has her heart set on a summer wedding. You understand, right?" I did understand, but not in the way Andrew thought. I was beginning to see a pattern in how Melissa operated, how she consistently positioned herself between my son and me. Despite being sidelined in the planning, I offered to contribute financially. Thomas would have wanted me to help give Andrew a beautiful wedding. I ended up paying for the venue, the catering, and Melissa's gown, a designer creation that cost more than my entire wedding to Thomas had. Each check I wrote was met with effusive thanks from Melissa, who would embrace me tightly in front of Andrew. Yet when his back was turned, her demeanor would cool instantly, her smile vanishing like morning mist under a hot sun. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from the wedding planner about the seating arrangements. "I just wanted to confirm that you'll be at table 7, she said. "Table 7, I repeated, confused. "Isn't that quite far from the main table? This is what the bride specified," the planner replied, uncomfortably. "I assumed you knew." I hadn't known. In fact, I had assumed naively, perhaps, that as the mother of the groom, I would be seated at the head table. When I called Andrew to ask about this, he sounded embarrassed. "Melissa thought it would be better this way, Mom. Her parents are divorced, and her mom's new husband doesn't get along with her dad. It's complicated." Yet somehow this complication had resulted in all of Melissa's family members being accommodated at tables near the bride and groom, while I, Andrew's only living parent, was placed at a table with distant acquaintances. The wedding day arrived bright and clear. As I sat alone in the church pew where Thomas should have been beside me, watching our son wait for his bride, I felt my husband's absence more keenly than I had in years. The ceremony was beautiful but impersonal, with no mention of Thomas or our family traditions. It felt more like a society event than a sacred joining of families. At the reception, seated at my distant table, I watched as Andrew and Melissa moved from group to group greeting guests. When they finally made their way to me nearly 2 hours into the reception, Melissa's smile was wide, but her eyes remained cold. "Janie, aren't you enjoying yourself?" she asked loudly enough for those around us to hear. "You look so lonely over here." Before I could respond, they were pulled away to cut the cake. I didn't speak to my son again that evening until the very end, when he hugged me briefly before leaving for their honeymoon. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he whispered. "I'll call you when we get back." That call came 3 weeks later, brief and distracted. Andrew sounded different, his voice lacking its usual warmth when speaking to me. I suggested our regular dinner the following week. "I'll have to check with Melissa," he replied. "She's planning our social calendar now." The dinners became monthly, then bi-monthly. Phone calls grew shorter often, with Melissa's voice audible in the background, reminding Andrew of somewhere they needed to be. Each time I saw him, he seemed more distant, more like a polite acquaintance than the son who had once shared everything with me. At one dinner, I overheard a conversation between Melissa and her mother in the restaurant bathroom. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but the mention of my name caught my attention. "Janie is still clinging to Andrew," Patricia was saying. "You need to create more distance there." "I'm working on it," Melissa replied, "but we still need her for now. Did you see that handbag she was carrying, vintage Gucci? The old lady has money, and Andrew says there's more where that came from." I stepped into a stall, my hands shaking, not wanting them to know I had heard. Their words confirmed the unease I had been feeling, but trying to dismiss. This wasn't about Melissa wanting Andrew's undivided attention. This was calculated. I considered confronting them, telling Andrew what I had heard, but would he believe me? The way he looked at Melissa with such adoration made me doubt he would accept anything negative about her. I decided to wait to watch and to hope that my son would eventually see through the facade on his own. I never imagined that the opportunity to open his eyes would come in the form of a house, or that it would cost me so much more than money. But sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we remember most clearly. 6 months into their marriage, Andrew called asking if we could meet for coffee. His voice sounded strained, lacking the confidence I was accustomed to hearing from my son. We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our homes, a place we used to frequent together before Melissa. When Andrew arrived, I immediately noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his nervous demeanor. He ordered a black coffee, something he had never liked before, and kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone to walk in. "Mom," he began after taking a deep breath. "Melissa and I found a house." My heart lifted momentarily. Perhaps this was why he had seemed so distant lately, busy with house hunting. "That's wonderful, honey. Where is it?" "It's in Oak Ridge Estates," he replied, naming one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in our city. "It's perfect, Mom. 4 bedrooms, a home office for both of us, a gourmet kitchen for Melissa's cooking, and a huge backyard for when we have kids someday. I smiled, genuinely happy to see his excitement. It sounds lovely. When can I see it? Andrew's expression faltered. Well, that's the thing, Mom. We put in an offer, but we're having some issues with financing. Issues? I asked. He stared down at his coffee, avoiding my eyes. The down payment. The bank wants 20%, and with property values in that neighborhood. His voice trailed off. I understood immediately. Andrew was asking for financial help. Though Thomas had left us comfortable Andrew's salary as a software engineer, while good wouldn't stretch to cover a down payment on a house in Oak Ridge Estates, especially not with the lifestyle he and Melissa had been living, with luxury vacations and designer clothes filling their social media pages. How much do you need? I asked directly. Andrew named a figure that made me inhale sharply. It was substantial, nearly a quarter of my liquid savings. But he was my only child, and if this house would make him happy, wouldn't Thomas want me to help? I can manage that, I said after a moment's calculation. The relief on Andrew's face was immediate and palpable. Really, Mom? That would be amazing. We can pay you back over time, of course. Don't worry about that, I assured him. Consider it an early inheritance. Your father would want you to have a beautiful home. 2 days later, I met with Andrew and Melissa at the bank. Melissa was uncharacteristically warm, embracing me tightly and whispering thanks in my ear. As we reviewed the paperwork with the mortgage officer, I noticed something odd. The loan amount seemed much lower than what would be required for a house in Oak Ridge Estates, even with my substantial down payment contribution. Is this correct? I asked the loan officer, pointing to the figure. Yes, Mrs. Harris, she confirmed. With your contribution covering 60% of the purchase price, the mortgage is quite manageable. I turned to Andrew, confused. 60%, I thought I was just covering the down payment. Andrew looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances with Melissa. Well, Mom, with the current interest rates, we thought it would be smarter to put down more up front. It reduces our monthly payments significantly. Before I could process this, Melissa jumped in smoothly. We were going to surprise you, Janie. We're setting up a room just for you, for when you might want to stay over or if you ever need to move in with us someday. We want you to think of it as your house, too. Her words were touching, but something in her expression didn't align with the sentiment. Still, with both of them looking at me expectantly and the bank officer waiting patiently, I signed the documents. Over the next few weeks, my contribution to their house grew beyond the initial agreement. There were closing costs, inspection fees, and various other expenses that Andrew would call about, always sounding apologetic but insistent that they couldn't manage without my help. Then came the furnishing of the house. Melissa had very specific tastes, expensive tastes. Artisan furniture, custom drapes, smart home technology throughout. Each time Andrew called with another request, the amount seemed reasonable on its own, but they were adding up quickly. Just one more thing, Mom, became a phrase I heard almost daily. Melissa found the perfect dining table, or the contractor says we need to upgrade the electrical for Melissa's studio. I kept careful records of every expense in a digital folder on my computer, labeling each receipt with the date and purpose. By the time they were ready to move in, I had contributed to 174 separate purchases for their new home beyond the initial house payment. The total was staggering, amounting to nearly half of what Thomas had left me. Despite this significant investment, I still hadn't seen the house. Each time I suggested visiting, there was an excuse. The painters are still working, Mom. The fumes would bother you. We're waiting on the furniture delivery. The place is a mess right now. Melissa's parents are in town this weekend. Maybe next time. One evening, I was reviewing my financial statements, calculating how much I had left for my retirement years when my phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. Great news, Mom. The house is finally ready. We're planning a housewarming dinner next Saturday. Save the date. I was elated. At last, I would see the home I had helped create for my son and his wife. I immediately began planning what to bring as a housewarming gift, settling on a beautiful crystal vase that had belonged to Thomas's mother, a family heirloom that I thought should continue in Andrew's home. I scheduled a hair appointment, bought a new outfit, and even practiced a small speech about how happy I was for them and how proud Thomas would have been of the home Andrew was building for his family. 3 days before the dinner, I texted Andrew to ask what time I should arrive, and if there was anything special I could bring for the meal. Hours passed without a response unusual for Andrew, who typically replied promptly to my messages. Finally, late that evening, my phone buzzed. The message that appeared on my screen would change everything between us. "Mom, I'm sorry, but you weren't invited to the dinner. Melissa doesn't want you there." I stared at the screen, certain I had misread, but the words remained unchanged, cruel in their simplicity. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Andrew, is this some kind of joke?" His response came quickly this time. "No joke, Mom. Melissa feels you're too involved in our lives. She wants this dinner to be just our friends and her family." The pain that shot through me was physical, as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. I tried calling Andrew immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent another text. "Andrew, I don't understand. I helped pay for this house. How can I not be welcome in it?" Minutes passed before his reply appeared, each word a fresh wound. "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You always bring up the money. Melissa says you use it to control me, to make me feel obligated to you. This is our house now, and we get to decide who comes into it." I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. The son, who had once been my closest companion, who had moved back to our city to be near me after college, was now telling me I wasn't welcome in his home, a home that, in reality, I had largely paid for. After gathering my composure, I sent one more message, trying to reason with him. "I have never tried to control you with money, Andrew. I helped because I love you and want you to be happy. Please, can we talk about this in person?" This time, it wasn't Andrew who responded, but Melissa. Using his phone, she sent a lengthy paragraph that felt rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Janie, this is Melissa. I think it's time we were honest with each other. Your relationship with Andrew isn't healthy. You call too often, you expect too much of his time, and you use your financial contributions to manipulate him. We appreciate your help with the house, but that doesn't give you the right to insert yourself into our lives whenever you want. The dinner is for our friends, people our age who we can relax around. Please respect our boundaries." I read and reread the message, each word cutting deeper than the last. The coldness, the calculation behind it, was unmistakable. This wasn't about boundaries or generational differences. This was Melissa systematically cutting me out of Andrew's life, now that she had gotten what she wanted from me. That night, unable to sleep, I logged onto social media, something I rarely did. There, I found multiple posts from Melissa about their dream home and preparations for the exclusive housewarming soiree planned for Saturday. There were photos of elaborate table settings, catering deliveries, and floral arrangements that must have cost a fortune. In one photo, I spotted the dining table I had paid for set for 14 people with fine china and crystal I didn't recognize. Melissa's parents featured prominently in her planning posts, her mother offering advice on place settings, her father apparently bringing an expensive wine collection to stock their new cellar. The realization hit me with crushing force. This wasn't just any dinner. This was a significant event planned well in advance, with Melissa's entire family invited. Only I, the person who had made it all possible, was excluded. As dawn broke, I sat at my kitchen table, Thomas's photograph before me, wondering what he would advise me to do. He had always been the stronger one, the one who knew when to stand firm. "What would you do, Thomas?" I whispered to his smiling image. "How do I make our son see what's happening?" And somewhere in my heart, I heard his voice as clear as if he were sitting beside me. "Sometimes, Janie, people only understand the value of what they have when they face losing it." With those words echoing in my mind, I made a decision that would forever change my relationship with my son, for better or worse. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in response to Melissa's lengthy message: "Okay." That simple two-syllable response, "okay," was far from an acceptance of their behavior. It was the beginning of my plan. After sending it, I placed my phone on silent mode and began to act. My first step was to retrieve the digital folder containing all 174 receipts, invoices, and payment records related to Andrew and Melissa's house. I methodically backed up these files to a secure cloud storage location, and then, in a symbolic gesture that felt surprisingly liberating, I deleted the original folder from my computer. Next, I called my bank and canceled all the automatic payments I had set up for various services at their house. The landscaping service, the pool maintenance, the security system, subscription, the premium cable package, all of it. I also froze the supplementary credit card I had given Andrew for house emergencies, which had somehow been used for everything from designer clothes to dinner at exclusive restaurants. As I worked through my financial disentanglement, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect, about finally acknowledging what Thomas would have seen immediately. I was being used by the very person I had sacrificed so much for. By mid-afternoon, I had made an appointment with Harold Benson Thomas's longtime friend and our family lawyer. His secretary, hearing the urgency in my voice, squeezed me in for a late afternoon consultation. Harold's office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd been coming there. The same leather chairs, the same family photos on his desk, the same smell of old books and coffee. His familiar grandfatherly face creased with concern as I recounted the situation with Andrew and Melissa. "I'm not surprised," he said when I finished removing his reading glasses with a sigh. "I've seen this scenario play out before, though, rarely with such significant amounts of money." "What are my options, Harold?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Let's review the paperwork on the house purchase first." As we went through the documents, Harold's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Janie, did you realize that your name is still on the deed?" I stared at him, confusion replacing my despair momentarily. "What do you mean I thought I was just contributing to the down payment? The house is supposed to be in Andrew and Melissa's names." "That's not what this paperwork indicates," Harold said, pointing to a clause I had overlooked. "You're listed as a co-owner with a 60% interest in the property. Andrew has 40% and Melissa isn't on the deed at all." The implications of this slowly dawned on me. So the house is legally partially mine. More than partially, you own the majority share, Harold confirmed. "I suspect this was an oversight in the rush to close the deal. They probably intended to refinance later and remove your name, especially given what you've told me about Melissa's long-term plans." A surge of emotion I couldn't quite name washed over me. It wasn't happiness or vindication, perhaps something closer to sad irony. "What should I do?" Harold considered this carefully. "You have several options. You could demand repayment of your investment and force a sale if they can't comply. You could transfer your ownership to them as a gift, though I wouldn't recommend that given the circumstances. Or you could use this position to negotiate a more respectful relationship going forward." I took a deep breath, the path ahead becoming clearer. "I think I need time to consider my next steps, but in the meantime, I want to protect what's legally mine." Harold nodded, understanding perfectly. "I'll draw up the necessary documents to secure your position and prevent any changes to the property ownership without your explicit consent." As I left his office, my phone, which I had kept on silent, showed 27 missed calls and 42 text messages. The first few were from Andrew asking if I had seen the bank notifications why the credit card was declined, whether there was an issue with my accounts. As the messages progressed, the tone changed from confusion to panic and finally to anger. The latest, from less than an hour ago, was particularly telling. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The landscapers said their contract was canceled. The cable is out. Melissa is furious. Call me immediately." I didn't call. Instead, I drove home and did something I hadn't done since Thomas died. I poured myself a glass of his favorite whiskey, sat in his old leather armchair, and allowed myself to really feel the pain, betrayal, and anger I had been suppressing for months. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Melissa, not Andrew. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. On the third attempt, I answered. "Janie?" Her voice was sharp, all pretense of warmth gone. "What do you think you're doing?" "Hello, Melissa," I replied calmly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You've canceled everything. The cable company says the account was in your name. The credit card company says you reported Andrew's card lost. What kind of childish game is this?" I took a slow breath before responding. "It's not a game, Melissa. You made it clear that I'm not welcome in your lives, so I'm respecting your wishes by removing my financial involvement as well." "You can't do this." Her voice rose, a note of panic breaking through the anger. "We have the housewarming tonight. People are coming, important people for my career." I'm sorry to hear that, I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. Perhaps your parents can help. They seemed very involved in the planning. This is about the dinner invitation, isn't it? Melissa's tone shifted to one I recognized well, the cajoling voice she used when trying to manipulate Andrew. I was just stressed, Janie. Of course you're welcome to come. In fact, we'd love to have you there. The insincerity was so transparent it was almost laughable. Thank you for the invitation, Melissa, but I'm afraid I have other plans now. You vindictive old woman, she hissed, her mask slipping completely. Andrew was right about you. You're using money to control us. No, Melissa, I replied, a strength I hadn't felt in years flowing through me. I'm simply no longer allowing you to use me for my money. There's a difference. I ended the call as she was mid-sentence, her voice rising in what promised to be a spectacular tirade. Within minutes, Andrew called. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided my son deserved at least the courtesy of a direct conversation. Mom! His voice was a mixture of confusion and frustration. What's going on? Why are you doing this? Hello, Andrew, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the pain his recent actions had caused. I think we need to have a serious conversation, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at Harold Benson's office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Harold, why would we need to meet at a lawyer's office? The alarm in his voice was evident. Because this is a legal matter now, Andrew. I've invested considerably in a property that I've now been told I'm not welcome to visit. Mom, that's not what I meant. Melissa was just stressed about the dinner. You know how she gets with her work colleagues coming over. I closed my eyes, hearing the excuses he had been making for Melissa's behavior for 2 years now. Andrew, either you meet me at Harold's office tomorrow or I'll be forced to proceed without your input. Your choice. After a moment of stunned silence, he agreed to the meeting. As I hung up, I felt a profound sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my relationship with my only child, but sometimes love meant setting boundaries, even when it hurt. The rest of that day and evening, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from both Andrew and Melissa, alternating between apologies, explanations, and when those didn't work, thinly veiled threats about how I would regret my actions and lose my son forever. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I spent the evening looking through old photo albums, remembering the little boy who had once looked at me with unconditional love and trust. The boy who had grown into a man his father would have been proud of, until he began changing into someone I barely recognized. As I placed the albums back on the shelf, I noticed Thomas's favorite quote framed on the wall, words he had lived by. The greatest legacy we can leave our children is not money or possessions, but the strength of character, to know right from wrong, and the courage to act accordingly. Tomorrow would test both my strength and Andrew's. I could only hope that somewhere inside him, the values we had instilled were still alive, waiting to be reawakened. The following morning, I arrived at Harold's office 15 minutes early, my nerves on edge, but my resolve firm. Harold greeted me with a reassuring smile, guiding me to his conference room where he had prepared several documents. I've outlined your legal position regarding the house, he explained, showing me a detailed report. I've also drafted 2 potential agreements depending on how the conversation goes today. At precisely 10 a.m., the receptionist announced Andrew's arrival. To my surprise, Melissa was with him. I hadn't specified that she should attend, but perhaps it was better this way. All cards on the table. Andrew looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and his usually neat hair uncombed. Melissa, by contrast, was immaculately dressed in what I recognized as a power suit, her makeup flawless, her expression determined. They made an odd pair as they entered the room, Andrew hesitant, Melissa charging forward like someone entering a battlefield. This is completely unnecessary, Melissa announced before even taking a seat. Family disputes should stay within the family, not involve lawyers. Harold, who had known Andrew since he was a child, regarded Melissa with a cool professionalism. Mrs. Harris has asked for my presence as her legal representative, and given the financial stakes involved, I believe that's entirely appropriate. Andrew finally spoke, his voice small, almost childlike. Mom, what is this about? Why are you doing this to us? The genuine confusion in his voice nearly broke my resolve. Did he truly not understand? Had Melissa so thoroughly convinced him that I was the problem? Andrew? I began carefully. I've contributed over $800,000 to your house and its furnishings. I did this willingly out of love for you. And then I received a text message telling me I wasn't welcome in that very house. Can you understand why that might be hurtful?" Andrew looked down at his hands. "It was just one dinner, Mom. Melissa was stressed about her boss coming over." "It wasn't just about the dinner," I replied. "It was about the pattern of behavior since you met Melissa. The canceled visits, the shortened phone calls, the way I've been gradually pushed out of your life except when you needed my money." Melissa interjected sharply. "That's not fair. Andrew has a right to build his own life without his mother hovering over him constantly." Harold cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. According to the property deed, Mrs. Harris owns 60% of the house in question, while Andrew owns 40%. Mrs. Melissa Harris has no legal ownership." Melissa's face paled visibly. "That's impossible. The house is in our names. We signed the papers." "Not all of them, apparently," Harold replied, sliding a copy of the deed across the table. "This is the registered deed with the county. As you can see, Janie and Andrew Harris are listed as co-owners." Andrew stared at the document in shock. I thought," he turned to Melissa, "you told me everything was in our names. You handled the paperwork." A flash of something, guilt, fear, crossed Melissa's face before she composed herself. "There must be a mistake. We'll have to get this fixed immediately." "That won't be possible without Mrs. Harris's consent," Harold explained calmly. "As the majority owner, any changes to the deed would require her signature." The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit Andrew. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. "Mom, what do you want?" It was the question I had been preparing for all night. "I want you to see what's happening, Andrew. I want you to understand that I have never tried to control you with money. I've only ever wanted to support you and see you happy." I took a deep breath before continuing. "I've prepared 2 proposals with Harold's help. The first option is that I transfer my ownership of the house to both of you as a gift with no strings attached. You would need to refinance to buy out my share, but I would facilitate that process." Andrew's eyes widened in surprise. This clearly wasn't what he had expected. "And the second option? "The second option is that we sell the house. I take my 60% of the proceeds and you take your 40%. You and Melissa can then purchase a home that you can truly afford on your own." Melissa's reaction was immediate and volcanic. "This is blackmail. You're trying to punish us because we wanted one private dinner without you interfering." I remained calm, looking only at my son. "It's not blackmail, Andrew. It's a choice. I will support whatever decision you make, but I need you to make it with your eyes open." Harold slid a folder toward Andrew. "Inside, you'll find documented evidence of all the financial contributions your mother has made toward your home and lifestyle. 174 separate transactions over the past year totaling $837,426. Andrew opened the folder with trembling hands, flipping through page after page of receipts, bank transfers, and credit card statements. His face grew increasingly pale as he realized the extent of my financial support. "I had no idea it was this much," he whispered. "Of course you knew." Melissa snapped her composure, cracking. "Where did you think the money was coming from? Did you think your salary could cover even half of what we've spent?" Andrew looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You told me Mom was contributing to the down payment and a few pieces of furniture. You said we could afford the rest." Melissa's expression hardened. "We could afford it because I knew she would pay for it. She always does. She throws money at you to keep you dependent on her." The cruelty of her words hung in the air. I watched my son's face, seeing the confusion, the hurt, and finally, the dawning realization. "Is that why you didn't want her at the dinner?" he asked quietly. "Because you were using her money but didn't want her around." Melissa's silence was more damning than any answer could have been. Andrew turned to me, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Melissa handled all the financial stuff. She told me the amounts were much smaller, that we were managing most of it ourselves. I wanted to reach out to him to comfort him, as I had when he was small, but I knew this was a moment he needed to navigate on his own." "What would you like to do now, Andrew?" He looked down at the documents again, then at Melissa, whose face had transformed into a mask of cold calculation, and finally back to me. I need some time to think. Harold nodded. That's reasonable. Why don't we reconvene in 1 week? In the meantime, all parties should refrain from making any changes to the property or its financing. As we prepared to leave, Andrew held back, letting Melissa walk ahead. Can I call you later, Mom? Just to talk. The simple request, so reminiscent of the son I had known before, brought tears to my eyes. Of course, Andrew. Any time. When they had gone, Harold looked at me with gentle concern. Are you all right, Janie? I nodded, dabbing at my eyes. Yes. For the first time in a long while, I think I actually am. The week that followed was one of profound change. Andrew called that very evening without Melissa, and we talked for hours. He asked questions about the house, the finances, but more importantly about my feelings over the past 2 years. For the first time, he truly listened. 3 days later, he asked if he could come over. When he arrived, he looked different, more like the Andrew I had raised. He told me he had moved into a hotel, that he was taking time to reevaluate his marriage and his priorities. I let her change me, he admitted, sitting in the kitchen where we had shared so many conversations over the years. I became so focused on making her happy that I stopped seeing how she was treating you, how she was treating everyone. She's very good at getting what she wants, I said gently, not wanting to criticize the woman he had chosen despite everything. Yes, she is, he agreed with a sad smile. And what she wanted was my family's money, not my family. On the day of our scheduled follow-up meeting, Andrew arrived alone. Melissa, he explained, had refused to attend, calling the whole process a manipulative farce. With Harold's guidance, Andrew and I reached an agreement. We would sell the house using my share of the proceeds to purchase a smaller home for me that would better fit my retirement needs. Andrew would use his share to start fresh without the financial entanglement and materialistic pressure that had characterized his life with Melissa. 2 months later, the house was sold. Melissa, faced with the reality of losing her luxury lifestyle, filed for divorce, demanding half of Andrew's assets. Thanks to Harold's foresight and the clear documentation of where the money had come from, her claims were largely unsuccessful. Andrew moved into a modest apartment and began the process of rediscovering who he was without Melissa's influence. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, with new boundaries and deeper understanding on both sides. As for me, I found a lovely townhouse closer to the city center where I joined a book club, took up pottery, and even began dating again, much to Andrew's supportive amusement. The pain of those difficult months never completely vanished, but it transformed into something valuable: wisdom, strength, and a deeper appreciation for honest relationships. 1 year has passed since that fateful text message that changed everything. As I sit in my new garden watching butterflies dance among the flowers Thomas would have loved, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. My relationship with Andrew has healed in ways I never expected. We meet for dinner every other week, a schedule that respects both his independence and our desire to remain close. These dinners are nothing like the tense, guarded meals we shared when Melissa was present. Now we laugh easily, share openly, and have rediscovered the comfortable companionship we once took for granted. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. Melissa received far less than she had demanded, thanks to the careful documentation of my financial contributions and the prenuptial agreement Andrew had insisted upon at Harold's recommendation. Last I heard, she had moved to another city, already engaged to another young professional with a promising career and presumably a wealthy family. Andrew has changed, grown. The experience, painful as it was, forced him to examine his own values and priorities. He's more discerning now, less easily swayed by appearances. He recently received a promotion at work, one earned through his own merit, rather than connections or impressions. As for me, this chapter has transformed me in unexpected ways. I've discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. The woman who once defined herself primarily as Thomas's wife and Andrew's mother has emerged as Janie Harris, a woman in her own right with boundaries, opinions, and a life richly lived. With some of the proceeds from the house sale, I fulfilled dreams Thomas and I had shared but never realized. I visited Paris, where I stood beneath the Eiffel Tower and whispered to him that I'd made it for both of us. I took a cooking class in Italy, making pasta by hand in a sunlit Tuscan kitchen. I walked the highlands of Scotland, feeling the wind that carries whispers of ancient stories. These travels weren't about escaping my life, but about embracing it, fully, honoring both my past and my future. Each journey taught me something new about the world and about myself. Perhaps the most profound change has been in how I view relationships. I've learned that true love, whether between parent and child friends or partners, must include respect. That generosity without boundaries isn't generosity at all, but an invitation to be taken for granted. That sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to let them face the consequences of their actions. Andrew and I have discussed this often during our healing process. He once asked if I regretted my decision to confront the situation as I did. No, I told him honestly. I regret that it was necessary, but not that I did it. It saved me, he admitted. I was losing myself becoming someone Dad would have been ashamed of. Hearing him invoke Thomas's memory without prompting warmed my heart. His father's values had remained within him, after all merely buried for a time. I've started volunteering at a community center teaching financial literacy to young adults. So many of them remind me of Andrew at that age, bright and hopeful but naive about how money can complicate relationships. I share my story not to elicit sympathy, but to illustrate how easily boundaries can erode when finances and family intertwine without clear communication. My widow support group has evolved into a circle of dear friends. We no longer meet just to share our grief, but to celebrate our continued lives. 4 of us recently took a cruise to Alaska, raising a toast under the northern lights to the loved ones who would always want us to keep finding joy. Last month, Andrew brought a woman named Laura to our dinner. She's a kindergarten teacher, kind and unpretentious, who looks at Andrew with genuine affection rather than calculation. I was careful not to seem too eager or invested, having learned my lesson about respecting his autonomy. But privately, I felt hopeful seeing how she engaged him in equal conversation, how she asked questions about his opinions rather than directing his thoughts. The most important lesson I've carried from this experience is that love should never require the diminishment of your own worth. Not romantic love, not familial love. This doesn't mean relationships won't involve sacrifice or compromise, but there's a profound difference between giving from a place of wholeness and giving because you believe your value lies in what you provide for others. My new home is smaller than the one I shared with Thomas, but it feels more truly mine. I've decorated it with treasures from my travels, photographs of Andrew and Thomas, and new art I've created myself in pottery classes. It's a physical manifestation of my journey from being defined by others to defining myself. I still miss Thomas every day. There are moments when something wonderful happens, and my first instinct is still to turn and tell him. But I've come to appreciate these moments as testaments to a love that continues beyond physical presence. He is with me in every choice I make that honors the values we shared. As for Andrew, watching him reclaim his authentic self has been one of the greatest joys of my life. We talk more honestly now than we ever did even before Melissa. There's a new dimension to our relationship, a mutual respect between adults rather than just the natural love between mother and child. I won't pretend the journey was easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, questioning my decisions, fearing I had lost my son forever. There were moments of anger so intense they frightened me, foreign emotions for someone who had always prided herself on patience and understanding. But through the pain came clarity. Through the loss came reclamation. Through the ending of one chapter began the writing of another richer one. If you're watching this and facing a similar situation, wondering whether to continue giving at your own expense or to finally stand firm, I hope my story offers some guidance. Remember that true generosity flows from strength, not fear. That boundaries aren't selfish but necessary. That you deserve respect, especially from those who claim to love you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from someone you loved? How did you find the strength to act? Please, share your experiences like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and remember that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to honor yourself in all your relationships and the wisdom to recognize the difference between sacrifice and surrender.